To the south, where Europe meets Africa beneath a blazing sun, lies a land of dramatic contrasts and fierce passion. Wedged between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, separated from the continent's mainland by the Pyrenees Mountains, modern Spain embodies a beautiful contradiction. It is a nation famous for its vibrant festivals, its siestas, and its deep Catholic traditions. A country that values family bonds, late-night conversations, and artistic expression in equal measure. But historically, Spain is an ancient land forged through extraordinary hardship. Its people survived wave after wave of invaders, centuries of religious conflict, and the collapse of their own global empire. Their character hardened through resistance against forces that seemed unstoppable. The story of how this sun-baked peninsula transformed into the nation we recognize today is an epic of faith, courage, and remarkable resilience. This is the history of Spain. The year 476 AD marked the final collapse of Roman authority in the West. Following that devastating fall, chaos consumed European territories as Germanic warlords carved up what had once been imperial provinces. Classical civilization had reached its endpoint, yet this destruction cleared the path for something entirely new. During these tumultuous centuries, the foundations were laid for kingdoms that would eventually surpass Rome's achievements. One such power would emerge from the Iberian Peninsula, taking its name from Hispania, the Roman designation for this corner of the world. That nation became España, known to English speakers as Spain. However, Spain's journey toward greatness contained no shortage of devastating setbacks and what appeared to be impossible barriers. During the 700s, the Visigoths, who had themselves conquered the peninsula, fell to an enormous force that had risen in the distant east. The Umayyad Caliphate, energized by Islam's revolutionary message, swept across North Africa and crossed into Europe. What we now call Spain became the western frontier of an empire stretching all the way to India's borders. Islamic governance would persist for centuries, though not permanently. Eventually, the Christian cross rose again as Iberian warriors fought desperately to recover their lost homeland. This struggle, known as the Reconquista, stretched across generations and ultimately ended in triumph. Having been subjects of foreign powers throughout their recorded history, the Spanish people finally unified and constructed their own empire, one surpassing any that had previously dominated them. This empire wouldn't remain confined to the Old World, but expanded into entirely new territories. Spain became arguably humanity's first truly global power, maintaining military and commercial presence worldwide, particularly throughout the Americas. Their American dominions stretched from the Louisiana Territory at their northern extent down to South America's southernmost reaches. Yet they would not build this empire alone, and eventually their imperial structure disintegrated, producing numerous independent nations from Mexico to the Philippines. As that empire crumbled, Spain's own destiny grew increasingly uncertain. Prior to Roman domination, numerous peoples controlled the territory we recognize today as Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. The Iberians had established a distinctive culture by the 6th century BCE, though Mediterranean powers heavily influenced them. Southern Iberian groups like the Tartessians were particularly shaped by contemporary civilizations from across the sea. The Iberians occupied most of the peninsula's southern and eastern coastal regions. Another significant population were the Vascones, ancestors of modern Basques, who inhabited northern areas where their descendants still live today. These groups were not Indo-European speakers. The Basques particularly preserved a non-Indo-European language so ancient that linguists cannot connect it to any known living tongue. The Celts, unquestionably Indo-European, also migrated into Iberia, where they intermingled with indigenous populations, creating the Celtiberian culture dominating the northwest. They also introduced ironworking to the region. As typical for this period and location, these populations remained politically fractured, consisting of numerous distinct tribes united primarily by shared cultural practices rather than any centralized government. Iberia's abundant mineral resources and strategic position between two major bodies of water, the Atlantic and Mediterranean, made it attractive for colonization by ancient imperial powers, particularly the Phoenicians, Greeks, and later the Carthaginians, themselves Phoenician descendants. Carthage established substantial colonies across Iberia, eventually clashing with Rome over regional control. Rome acquired Carthaginian territories in 206 BCE following the Second Punic War. However, complete conquest of the peninsula, still largely controlled by those various tribes, wasn't achieved until 19 BCE, just as Rome entered its Golden Age. Iberia underwent intensive Romanization, though certain regions, especially the rugged northern highlands, remained comparatively isolated. The peninsula's people preserved many traditional customs, but largely embraced Roman civilization, including Latin language, political structures, and religious practices, including Christianity, which would eventually dominate. They consequently benefited from Rome's architectural, technological, economic, and military presence. Yet Roman governance, including its golden period, couldn't last indefinitely. By the 5th century AD, the empire had fragmented into eastern and western halves, following years of administrative decay. The western portion struggled increasingly to maintain territorial control. Iberia, along with Gaul, Britain, and western North Africa, would be overwhelmed by Germanic invaders. The specific tribes entering the peninsula and dismantling Roman Hispania included the Suebi, the Alans, the Vandals, and most significantly, the Visigoths. During autumn 409 AD, the first three groups crossed into Iberia, systematically destroying Rome's tenuous regional authority and establishing their own kingdoms. The Vandals settled in the far south, creating Vandalusia, modern Andalusia, while another contingent moved northwest. The Alans, who were actually from the Eurasian steppes rather than Germanic origins, occupied much of modern Portugal and central Spain. The Suebi claimed the northwestern quarter of the peninsula. However, the weakened Romans weren't prepared to surrender the region without serious resistance. Not all migrating tribes were entirely hostile toward Rome. In fact, Roman authorities managed to negotiate occasional uneasy alliances with certain groups. The Visigoths represented one such group, whom Emperor Honorius summoned to help resist other invaders. In exchange, they would receive land in southwestern Gaul, modern France. In 418, Visigothic King Vallier agreed, and this arrangement proved temporarily successful. Romans managed to reclaim significant portions of the peninsula, particularly eastern Alan territories, while the Suebi annexed the western half of Atlantic holdings. During the resulting chaos of 429, Vandal King Gaiseric, seeking better opportunities, relocated his people to North Africa, establishing what eventually became a substantial kingdom incorporating the Balearic Islands. Following their departure, Romans reclaimed additional southern territory. However, the Suebi years later moved to claim much of Hispania for themselves, prompting the Visigoths, with imperial permission, to invade again and expel them. Over subsequent decades, the Visigoths pushed the Suebi into the northwestern corner, now known as Galicia. Hispania's borders continued shifting throughout this period, while the unstable Roman-Visigoth relationship remained similarly fluid. Despite facing numerous challenges, including destructive internal conflicts, it would ultimately be the Visigoths who wrested Hispania permanently from Rome's control. King Euric, who had murdered his brother, who had himself murdered his own brother, ascended to power in 466. He led the Visigoths in territorial expansion, fighting directly against Rome and destroying remaining imperial authority there by 472. Western Roman governance in Hispania had effectively ended. The Visigothic kingdom extended from Poitiers in western France to modern Portugal, excluding Galicia, still Suebi-controlled, and certain northern regions, particularly Celtiberian and Basque territories, which proved difficult to access. Several years later, in 476, the entire Western Roman Empire finally collapsed. Though Roman authority had disappeared from the region, cultural and linguistic Roman influence remained extraordinarily powerful. The Hispano-Roman population numbered approximately 6 million during this era, while the new Germanic rulers perhaps totaled only 200,000. Furthermore, the Visigoths themselves had become considerably Romanized. Consequently, Roman language, institutions, and despite Eurich's suppression of Catholicism in favor of his people's Arian Christianity, religious practices continued dominating the area. This influence remains evident today in numerous ways, including Spain's very name, derived from Latin rather than Germanic origins. The Visigoths actually viewed themselves not as Roman Hispania's destroyers, but as its legitimate heirs. Despite their Romanization, these conquerors remained socially separate from the conquered population for quite some time. Visigoths and Hispano-Romans operated under distinct legal codes, and intermarriage carried the death penalty. Despite their achievements, Visigothic supremacy was never guaranteed. These remained unstable times with competing powers to consider. To the east, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, had survived and hadn't abandoned Rome's universal imperial ambitions. It wouldn't be long before this empire struck back, with Hispania in their sights. To the north and east, the Visigoths bordered other Germanic tribes equally brave and ambitious, particularly the Franks, who would soon make their historical mark. History becomes somewhat obscured during Visigothic rule, but fortunately sufficient information survives to tell their remarkable story. In 484, Euric died, and his son Alaric II succeeded him. Alaric would confront the rising Frankish power in battle. The Catholic Franks had declared themselves protectors of Iberian Catholics living under Arian Visigothic rule, using this justification to invade Visigothic territory. Under King Clovis, the Franks defeated the Visigoths in 507 at the Battle of Vouillé, where King Alaric II was killed. Following this devastating defeat, much Frankish territory beyond the Pyrenees was lost. The Visigoths, formerly ruling from Toulouse, now governed from Toledo. However, this defeat had fundamentally damaged their ability to rule effectively. A lengthy instability period followed. Although the Visigoths were relatively democratic, kings required election by nobles. This didn't prevent civil wars and power struggles. Foreign powers, particularly the Ostrogoths and Franks, exploited opportunities to intervene in these internal conflicts. In 549, civil war erupted again under King Agila I. This time, however, a new contender would enter the stage. When news of these events reached Constantinople, Byzantine Emperor Justinian the Great ordered his forces toward Hispania. His reign's primary goal was simply restoring the Roman Empire. He and his generals had already reconquered Italy and much of North Africa. Now they would reacquire Hispania from barbarians while they fought among themselves. In 552, during the Civil War, Eastern Roman forces landed in southern Iberia under a commander whose identity remains uncertain. The civil war ended in 555 when Agila was assassinated and Athanagild became king. But it was too late. The Byzantine presence now extended throughout much of southeastern Iberia and the Balearic Islands. Though Athanagild tried, expelling them proved too difficult for the time being. Fortunately for the Visigoths, the Romans had no choice but to stop there. Justinian's empire was suffering from plague that had recently struck them, and the emperor himself died in 565. With his death, as we now understand in hindsight, died any final hope of restoring Roman authority in the West. Athanagild died in 567 from an unusual cause for a Visigothic king, natural causes. The following year, Liuvigild became king and would see more success along his borders. During the 570s, he waged war against the Byzantines, recapturing Cordoba and significantly reducing their territory. He also conducted successful and merciless campaigns against the Basques and Cantabrians, pushing them back into their territory and finally defeating the Suebi completely, annexing their lands. However, Liuvigild made critical mistakes, including naming his son Hermenegild as co-ruler. Hermenegild used this position to revolt against his father, sparking civil war. He had converted to Catholicism, which his father viewed as treason. He attempted to gain foreign support through this conversion, achieving nominal papal backing, but this didn't save him. In 585, his father captured him in Seville and banished him. Hermenegild would later be killed. Though Hermenegild failed, he likely accelerated the inevitable move toward Catholicism. Liuvigild died in 586, and his successor, his other son, Rekard I, converted the kingdom to Catholicism soon after. Most subjects peacefully followed suit, though not all. Rekard died in 601, and his kingdom entered another extended instability period marked by civil war, during which most kings died violently. The church attempted using its new influence to stop the violence by declaring kings sacred agents of God, but this didn't completely eliminate regicide. Despite internal chaos in the south, the Visigoths finally achieved success expelling the Byzantines from Iberia in 624. The Romans retained Balearic Islands control, but their mainland defeat proved decisive. They would never return. The Visigoths now controlled all of Hispania except the north. Through their religious conversion, they achieved greater unity with the Hispano-Romans. In fact, the distinction between Hispano-Roman and Goth was becoming less significant. Increasingly, they began viewing themselves as one people, no longer Romani and Visigothi, but as a single Hispani population. However, this unity was exclusive, not extending to other Iberian groups. This perspective strengthened in 654 when the Lex Visigothorum, Visigothic Code of Laws, took effect, replacing previous legal codes and applying equally to Visigoths and Hispano-Romans. Political order, indeed life generally, in Visigothic Hispania would remain unstable for decades. Most kings struggled to maintain power. Whatever authority Visigothic kings could wield ultimately wouldn't be sufficient. In the 8th century, a new invader would arrive at Hispania's doorstep, and they wouldn't be easily turned away. Empowered by their new religion's spirit, they would completely topple the Visigothic kingdom and permanently alter Spain's historical trajectory. The 7th century witnessed the birth of another major world religion among a people called the Arabs, Islam. From approximately 630 to 660 AD, Arab armies exploded from the Arabian Peninsula like lightning, completely destroying Persia and reducing Rome's Middle Eastern borders to Anatolia. They spent the remainder of the century expanding further. After fighting for North Africa extensively, they finally seized control during the 690s. By the year 700, the Umayyad Caliphate stretched from modern Kazakhstan to Morocco, and they weren't content to stop there. They were now only a strait away from the weakened Visigothic kingdom. Indeed, the Visigoths were experiencing yet another strife period. Exact information remains lost, but it appears that King Witiza, reportedly an inefficient and hedonistic ruler who allowed his kingdom to fall into disrepair, died sometime around 710 AD. In his absence, two individuals claimed the throne, Roderick and Aquila II. However, they never entered proper civil war because the Muslims had already noticed this weakness and pounced immediately. Islam would step onto Iberian soil in 711 AD. It would remain for nearly 800 years. The initial force of approximately 7,000 men was led by a Berber commander named Tariq ibn Ziyad. The Berbers were a North African ethnic group recently converted to Islam and placed under caliphate rule. Tariq's army was likely a combined Berber and Arab force referred to as Moors. King Roderick moved his army southward from the north, where he had been fighting Basques, to confront them. The Visigothic and Muslim armies met that year at the Battle of Guadalete, a famous decisive Muslim victory over disorganized, disloyal Visigothic forces. Roderick himself died in battle, leaving the Visigoths leaderless. The Islamic army grew once their potential became clear, and the rest of Iberia fell rapidly to them. After less than a decade, by 718, the Umayyad Caliphate had conquered the entire Visigothic kingdom. Iberia became known to Muslims as Al-Andalus, the name referring to Islamic Iberia throughout its duration. The aristocracy often submitted to the Caliphate to retain their privileges. Common folk frequently surrendered as well, perhaps believing the invasion temporary. Others refused to submit. Among those who resisted, a significant group retreated to Asturias, a rugged, mountainous, poor, undeveloped northern region. There they joined native Asturies and Cantabrians, Celtiberian peoples. Romans and Visigoths had struggled to pacify this region, and now Caliphate armies would also struggle to hold it, as locals frequently rose against them and harassed them with guerrilla warfare. Still, the Muslims continued expanding, crossing the Pyrenees into modern France. However, the Franks defeated and pushed them back, first at the Battle of Toulouse by Duke Odo of Aquitaine in 721, and later in 732, more famously and permanently, by Charles Martel. Islamic expansion into Western Europe thus halted. With this barrier established, Muslims began focusing more on subduing Al-Andalus, including the untamed north. The Christians held out, however, and under a bold leader named Pelagius, Don Pelayo in Spanish, they won their first victory. Not much is known of Pelagius, his very existence is even questioned, but sometime between 718 and 722, he reportedly led a group of men at the Battle of Covadonga, where his forces ambushed a much larger Islamic force in a narrow mountain pass, utterly destroying them. Muslims attempted to subdue Pelagius again, but this effort also proved disastrous. Pelagius became enormously popular through his successes and became king of the newly independent Kingdom of Asturias. Similarly, to the east, the Basques, who had caused previous rulers considerable trouble, now caused Islamic rulers difficulty. Pelagius reportedly arranged his children's marriages to other rebel nobles to secure alliances among the loosely united northern groups, attempting to unify resistance. This was the first victory of the long process known as the Reconquista, the Reconquest, the war to reclaim Hispania from Muslims. It would be an extraordinarily long process, however, not completed until 1492. For the moment, it wasn't yet much of a reconquest, as Asturias remained very much on the defensive and would continue so for some time. For now, the rest of Iberia remained firmly under Islamic rule. Despite living under Islamic authority, Christianity wasn't to be erased in Al-Andalus, nor was there even a harsh effort to do so for the time being. Christians, and Jews for that matter, were under Islamic law considered dhimmis, protected persons, because they were people of the book, followers of a different religion, but an Abrahamic one centered on the same God with similar beliefs. Thus they were to be tolerated and protected more than other groups. However, they were certainly not equal in society. Dhimmis held lower social and legal status, had to pay a tax called the jizya, and were more readily enslaved. Muslim women couldn't marry dhimmi men, but Muslim men could marry dhimmi women. There were numerous other minor regulations. Christians and Jews couldn't ride noble beasts like horses and camels and had to wear special clothing. Of course, variation occurred over this long period, with some eras more tolerant than others. This situation naturally disappointed Christians, but Jews of Iberia, who hadn't been highly regarded in Visigothic society, welcomed the change. They now actually had higher status with more opportunities. If one was too open about their beliefs, or especially if they denounced Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, the penalty was death. But if one conformed and remained discreet about their beliefs outside churches and homes, they could achieve favorable status even as known dhimmis. Iberian Christians in Al-Andalus were known as Mosarabs. Still, accepting Islam's advantages tempted many Iberians. Gradually, over centuries, many converted, becoming what Spanish calls muladis, ethnic Iberians who converted to Islam and often had mixed Arabic-Iberian parentage. By the 10th century, most Andalusian Muslims were converts. However, conversion didn't guarantee total equality either. Within Muslim society, division also existed. The ethnic North African Berbers were only recent Islamic converts and were often considered second-class citizens by ethnically Arab elites. All this significantly affected how Al-Andalus's history unfolded. Indeed, Muslim infighting would be a primary cause of their weakness facing Christians, not Christian strength, as one might expect. Arabic became a dominant administrative language in the region, but many natives continued speaking Latin, which was diverging and would eventually give birth to Castilian Spanish, modern Standard Spanish, Portuguese, and regional languages like Catalan. Once again, Iberia was part of a powerful, sprawling empire with many benefits. Muslims imported new science and technology from the Far East to Al-Andalus that spread slowly to the rest of Europe, improving many Iberians' quality of life. Alongside this, they re-imported old Greek and Roman ideas, largely lost since Rome's fall. However, there were also downsides. The Visigoths had practiced slavery, but it grew and became internationalized under Muslims, as Christian and Jewish Iberians were enslaved and sent elsewhere throughout the Great Empire, while Slavic and African slaves from as far as Sudan were imported to Iberia. Islamic control over Iberia would last for ages, but Umayyad control specifically would waver within a century. In either 739 or 740, a Berber revolt began in North Africa against Arab rule, eventually succeeding, with the Maghreb, western North Africa, escaping Umayyad control. Their Iberian hold became tenuous. Around the same time, in 739, a great opportunity arose in Galicia when a Christian rebellion broke out. The Asturians, now under King Alfonso I, moved to support it. Galicia and Leon joined Asturias when the rebellion proved successful. The north was to a fair degree considered not worth Muslim struggle, especially when they were preoccupied with other matters following the Berber revolt. Within Al-Andalus itself, Berber populations overthrew local administrators and seized much of the region. Arab control was regained in 743, yet even then, conflict continued within the Arab population between original invading Arab forces and newer rivals. Umayyad recapture of Al-Andalus proved only temporary. Within a decade, the Umayyads' very existence was questioned. In 750, they were replaced by a new order, the Abbasids, with rising eastern discontent. The western provinces again became weakly held, and Al-Andalus fell under Yemeni Arab faction control. This sparked civil war between Yemenis and Abbasids. The Yemenis began sheltering Umayyad dynasty survivors, the hunted ruling order. This was a mistake, as an Umayyad prince named Abd al-Rahman, whose mother was Berber, still viewed himself as rightful caliph. When he arrived in Al-Andalus, he overthrew the Yemenis in 756. The independent Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba was declared under his rule. He spent much of his reign fighting Abbasids and discontented Iberian Muslims to gain control of Al-Andalus, but he succeeded, ruling over 30 years and ensuring his descendants' succession. The kingdom of Asturias, as mentioned, profited from this momentary turbulence. But the Christians of Iberia's north weren't all on the same page either. Indeed, Asturians would periodically conflict with Galicians and Basques for many years. Cohesion on neither side was ever perfect. Circumstances where Christians and Muslims allied against mutual Christian or Muslim enemies were certainly not unheard of. In fact, a famous Islamic Christian alliance was established at this time outside, but resulting from events in Iberia. The alliance between Abbasids under Harun al-Rashid and the great Christian emperor across the Pyrenees who was beginning to exert his influence, Charlemagne. Both Abbasids and Franks considered Abd al-Rahman's independent emirate a threat, so they united against him. Charlemagne invaded in 778. However, this proved one of the few conflicts where he wasn't successful, so he and his forces left. His departing army was ambushed by Basques, whom Charlemagne had fought since his reign's beginning. The Battle of Roncesvalles Pass became famous, though perhaps somewhat exaggerated. Charlemagne didn't entirely give up, however, and due to internal Muslim conflict, his forces maintained his empire's presence in northeastern Spain up to the Ebro River as a military march for some time. Charlemagne had assumed the position, much to Byzantine's dismay, as Roman emperor and Christianity's protector in 800 AD. His and the Pope's recognition of Asturias gave great credibility to it and its king Alfonso II. In 824, a new kingdom arose in the region, the Kingdom of Pamplona, later known as Navarre. This was a Basque nation, actually on good terms with Muslims at this time and more hostile toward Franks. Amid this age of competing groups, Andalusians, Abbasids, Asturians, Basques, Franks, came yet another contender. Records are murky here as well, but it's recorded that in 844 the first Vikings arrived in Iberia. They attempted raiding A Coruña in Galicia, but were met by King Ramiro I and majorly defeated thanks to Iberian ballistae. They weren't discouraged, however, and continued raiding Iberian coasts, later contacting Muslims that year when they attacked Cadiz, Lisbon, Seville, and even Cordoba. Abd al-Rahman II gathered his forces, ousted them by year's end, and assembled a fleet to deter future attacks. The Vikings would return and see some Iberian successes, but nothing comparable to their activities in England and Francia. Muslims and Iberians thwarted their assaults too efficiently for them to gain a peninsular stronghold. Ramiro I of Asturias died in 850 AD, succeeded by his son Ordoño I. His reign resembled his predecessors, fighting Moors, Basque rebels, and now Norsemen. His greatest victory was against Cordobans at Albelda in 859. He also worked to repopulate border territories, a process known as repoblación. These settlers were known as Foramontanos, those from the mountains. Ordoño died at age 66, succeeded by his son Alfonso III. Alfonso III stood out among Asturian kings, earning the title El Magno, the Great. This title was earned, as one might expect, for his battle successes against the Emirate of Cordoba. Despite a general uptrend, Al-Andalus had entered regression and weakness after defeating further Galician and Basque rebellions. Alfonso III expanded into territory now part of northern Portugal, taking Porto at age 68 and Coimbra a decade later. Border fighting was regular and often fierce. In 884, however, a temporary truce was signed, as Alfonso III was compelled to subdue a rebellion for the throne led by his own brothers. The Cordobans also faced internal issues as their subject power waned under inefficient Emir Abdallah ibn Muhammad. Alfonso the Great's successes weren't merely military victories. He's also remembered for restoring Northern Kingdom pride, strengthening their identity as Visigoth heirs and Iberia's rightful rulers. He was also a culture patron in arts, architecture, and Asturian history recording. His kingdom stretched from northern Portugal to Navarre's borders. However, upon his death, it was divided among his three quarrelling sons. Fruela II became Asturias king, Garcia I became Leon king, and in the west, Ordoño II became Galicia king. This division proved only temporary. By 924, the kingdoms were nominally reunited by Ordoño II of Galicia's inheritance, this time as the Kingdom of Leon rather than Asturias, as Leon was now the central city. Though Ordoño was brave and effective, civil war continued until Ramiro II firmly established reunification in 931. Major changes were happening across the border as well. Abd al-Rahman III, remembered as one of Al-Andalus's greatest rulers, ascended to power in 912. Not satisfied with being merely an emir, he changed his title to caliph in 929. This was a huge violation, as Islam traditionally recognized only one caliph and caliphate. This occurred as Fatimids expanded westward into North Africa, approaching Al-Andalus's borders and its North African territories. Though they would soon in the 930s face Ramiro II's threat, whom they called Al-Shaitan, the devil, this period marked Al-Andalus's golden age beginning. Ramiro the Devil is known for defeating Muslims on their own turf, most famously his decisive victory over the Caliph at Simancas in 939. He had pushed his kingdom eastward throughout his reign, consolidating hold over a territory called Castile, related to the Spanish word for castle, named for its heavy fortifications. However, Leonese hold over this independent-minded Castile was weak, and its count was openly defiant of the king. With Pamplona's support, Castile became a semi-autonomous county under Fernán González in 951, paving the way for future changes. In a bid for further independence, Castile openly rebelled, attempting to take Leon's territory and allying with the Caliphate to do so. Sancho I became Leon's king in 956 AD, was deposed by a rival but returned in 960. He would end this Castilian rebellion. Sancho I was poisoned in 966, succeeded by his 4-year-old son Ramiro III, who reigned until 984. Meanwhile, in Al-Andalus, Caliph Abd al-Rahman III died in 961, succeeded by his son Al-Hakam II. Al-Hakam II died in 976 and was succeeded by his approximately 11-year-old son Hisham II. Being too young to rule independently, regents stepped in, including a figure known to history as Almanzor, corruption of Arabic Al-Mansur, the victorious. Almanzor, somewhat self-made, had greater ambitions than regency. He immediately began plotting to control the caliphate himself. Though young Hisham remained on the throne, he became a puppet, and by 981, Almanzor was the real power exercising absolute authority. Almanzor raised Arab, Berber, and Slavic mercenary armies, bringing Al-Andalus's military to its apex. He then unleashed campaigns against northern Christians throughout his reign, bringing the caliphate itself to its peak. Almanzor tore through Christians with remarkable efficiency. In 985, he sacked Barcelona. He attacked Leon in 988 and Santiago de Compostela in Galicia in 998. Almanzor died in 1002, having ruled 20 years. The title of Caliph in Córdoba had become merely a title. Actual authority went to Almanzor's son, Abd al-Malik al-Muzaffar. Al-Muzaffar died young in 1008, succeeded by his inept brother Sanchuelo. While campaigning against Leonese King Alfonso V, those loyal to the deposed caliph rose against Sanchuelo, sparking civil war within Al-Andalus. Sanchuelo's assassination in 1009 and the resulting civil wars marked the caliphate's downfall in a period known as the Fitna of Al-Andalus, Arabic for strife, lasting from 1009 to 1013. The caliphate broke into numerous competing individual kingdoms called taifas, Arabic 4 factions. By 1031, taifas had permanently replaced the caliphate. Major taifas included Toledo, Badajoz, Zaragoza, and Valencia. During this period, Córdoba was sacked by Berbers. Many recently arrived under Almanzor. The population was massacred. Chaos spread across Al-Andalus. Jews were specifically targeted by rioting Cordoban Muslims and would be in many other instances during this time. Another example being the 1066 Granada massacre. The taifas were divided among many different lines, including ethnic divisions among Berbers, Arabs, Iberian Muslims, and even former Slavic slaves. This administrative division weakened Al-Andalus, making it vulnerable to Christian expansion. It's remarkable how quickly Al-Andalus went from zenith to fragmentation, though it's important to note that caliphate collapse didn't necessarily mark a dark age. Life quality within taifas remained prosperous when things finally settled down, at least relative to the era. This fragmentation was naturally welcome to Christian kingdoms, who had actually moved to assist it. However, Christians also found themselves too disunited to truly capitalize on southern chaos. In fact, diminishing Muslim threats immediately increased Christian competition. Frankish rule in the northeast had collapsed by the 11th century as well. The French monarchy had become weak, and regional rulers moved toward what they'd wanted for some time: independence. During the 10th century, when the impotent French king failed to assist them against Almanzor, ties were truly severed, giving rise to states like the county of Barcelona. Leon's king at this time was Alfonso V. Leon still stood as the most powerful Christian kingdom. In fact, some Leonese kings, viewing themselves as Christian kingdom's center and Visigoth heirs, went so far as to call themselves Imperator Totius Hispaniae, Emperor of all Spain, especially now with the caliphate gone. But Leon wasn't unrivaled. Such a bold title doesn't overshadow Pamplona's King Sancho III's efforts in his time. Sancho III had ascended around 1004 and would be known as Nagusia, Basque for the Great. As the caliphate collapsed into different states, much like Leon's Alfonso V, Sancho believed Christians should unite to press into them. It's just that they happened to disagree on who should do the uniting. Sancho the Great of Pamplona was more successful in this effort. By conquering eastern and southern neighbors and marrying into Castile's family, he expanded Pamplona's borders, by now starting to be known as the Kingdom of Navarre, quite remarkably. Such expansiveness naturally led to tension with Leon, and war between them came in the 1030s, which Sancho won decisively. He even took Leon City, where he briefly held the emperor title. His domain was now the largest Christians in Iberia had ruled since the Visigoths. However, it wasn't to last long. He died in 1035 and divided his kingdom among his 4 sons. This division would be of major importance to Spanish history, paving the way for 2 particular kingdoms' future glory, Castile and Aragon. However, this partible inheritance, a product of Frankish influence, would also barrier Christian reconquest's future welfare, helping set them against each other. Iberia was now a patchwork of competing Christian and Muslim kingdoms, neither truly united against the other. The former Leonese king, Bermudo III, son of Alfonso V, who had taken refuge in Galicia, returned to rule his kingdom after Sancho's death, only to lose it again to Sancho's son Ferdinand, Count of Castile, in 1037, after dying fighting him at the Battle of Tamaron. Ferdinand I then became king of a kingdom now known as Castile and Leon. He would rule nearly 30 years. For years, Christian kingdoms had paid tribute to Muslims to deter invasion. Now the tables had turned. The kingdom of Leon was so powerful it could demand tribute, called parias, from some taifas, a practice neighbors in Aragon and Barcelona had already begun. Not all taifas surrendered peacefully, however. Ferdinand periodically invaded them throughout his reign to force them to resume crippling tributes. He wasn't always satisfied with tribute alone and would also take land, most notably Coimbra city in 1064. Seeming to follow his father's footsteps, he defeated the Navarrese king, his brother Garcia, at the Battle of Atapuerca in 1054, where Garcia was killed. Navarre then became a vassal. Ferdinand I died in 1065 and, much like his father, divided his strong kingdom among his three sons into Galicia, Leon, and Castile. That rarely works, and much like their father, Ferdinand's sons soon went to war with each other. The kingdom finally reunited under Sancho II in 1072. Sancho II died from assassination that same year, but the throne passed intact to the brother he had dethroned, Alfonso VI. That year, after consolidating kingdom control and expanding into neighbors' lands, Alfonso VI would also claim Emperor of all Hispania title. In 1085, trouble in Toledo led to a major game shift. The emir had died, and his successor was unpopular. He reached out to Alfonso VI for help quelling rebellion in Toledo city. Emir al-Qadir wished to escape to Valencia, where he would rule instead. Alfonso VI obliged and besieged Toledo that year. The city fell peacefully, or at least without violence, and with this, the old Visigothic kingdom's capital and surrounding territory was once more in Christian hands. The Christian threat to other taifas had now become quite grave. The divided taifas panicked but couldn't settle things themselves. The pariahs, by design, prevented them from fielding large armies. They faced a decision: be conquered by Christians or risk inviting outsiders to defend them. They chose the latter. To the south in Morocco, a Berber dynasty known as the Almoravids ruled a great empire stretching across much of the Western Sahara. From humble desert origins, this group had united under a rather strict Islamic doctrine relative to the rest of the Islamic world. As a powerful Islamic neighbor, the taifas were forced to call on them for aid. In 1086, under their Amir Yusuf ibn Tashfin, they crossed the strait and arrived in Iberia. As they moved north, Alfonso VI departed from a Zaragoza siege and moved south to meet them. They met in October that year at the Battle of Sagrajas. There, the Almoravids and their Taifa allies crushed the Christians. However, both sides took heavy casualties, so the broader result was a temporary truce, during which Taifas stopped paying pariahs. But the Almoravids would return and would place Christians once again on the defensive. For now, however, Alfonso sought to force Taifas to resume paying pariahs and called upon a famed regional warrior known as Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, better known as El Cid, from Arabic Al-Sayyid, the Lord, to assist him. This figure, prominent in Spanish legend and history, was renowned for his command abilities. He would fight in service of both Taifas and Christians throughout his life, ending on the Christian side and ruling Valencia. However, Christians also had allies to call upon. Things in Europe were changing. Iberia wasn't the only area where Christians and Muslims fought over territory. In the east, Islamic forces pressed further into Byzantine territory, threatening both Constantinople and, some even feared, as they advanced into Sicily, Rome itself. Christendom rallied not only to defend its Christian capitals, but to reclaim ancient holy cities from Muslims as well, namely Jerusalem. This was the Crusades beginning. Most crusade focus would be in the east, but other crusaders saw Iberian opportunities to fulfill their duty to God, where Muslims and Christians had crossed swords for centuries. The perspective that the reconquest was a holy liberation war intensified among Christian Iberians during this time. Alfonso VI called for aid, and foreign soldiers, primarily from various modern French states, arrived. Indeed, Burgundian leaders even married into his family, with effects lasting to this day. In 1088, the Almoravids returned, but were defeated at the siege of Aledo. Many Taifa rulers abandoned Yusuf ibn Tashfin following this defeat. Though allies and fairly ethno-culturally and religiously similar peoples, the Taifas and Almoravids didn't get along well. The Taifas found Almoravids to be violent, fanatical barbarians. The Almoravids found Taifa rulers weak, degenerate, and in proper need of a kick to the posterior. Yusuf would provide such a kick. He left Iberia again, and when he returned in 1090, he began deposing Taifa rulers and placing the peninsula under direct Almoravid rule. Some Taifas went so far as to request Christian help against Almoravids, but Alfonso couldn't stop them either. In 1097, they met at the Battle of Consuegra, where Christians were defeated. El Cid held them back in Valencia, but the city was abandoned when he died in 1099. In 1108, another major battle occurred at Uclés, again ending in Almoravid victory. The following year, in 1109, Almoravids attempted besieging Toledo, but Christians held them back twice. A setback, but Almoravids now held all Taifas except Zaragoza. The Almoravids showed themselves harsh governors, relinquishing many privileges of not only Christians and Jews, but to some extent even Muslim Andalusians. Alfonso VI died that year. His male heir had died at the Battle of Uclés, so the throne passed to his daughter Urraca. She had married Alfonso the Battler, ruler of Aragon and Navarre, and a successful warrior who had fought Muslims for years, the previous year, as part of her father's effort to unite the kingdoms. It would fail. Many Leonese were dissatisfied with the marriage and concerned about the battler's potential ambitions over them. Rebellions broke out, and nobles began plotting. Urraca, who would later be called the Reckless, was herself dissatisfied with the marriage. The two disliked each other, and Urraca openly accused Alfonso I of abuse. The marriage was annulled in 1110 by the Pope, but Alfonso ignored this and kept pressing his rights until 1114, bringing the kingdoms into war. Alfonso eventually returned to seizing territory from Zaragoza, taking Zaragoza city itself in 1118 with French help as part of an official crusade. Urraca ruled over Castile and Leon independently until 1126, when she died and was succeeded by Alfonso VII. In 1128, Alfonso VII and Alfonso I concluded peace, setting the border between their kingdoms. Alfonso the Battler died in 1134 while campaigning against Almoravids. Strangely, his succession plan was for the kingdom to be divided between Knights Templar, Hospitaller, and Holy Sepulchre Knights. This was disregarded by Aragonese nobles, and a real heir was sought. However, he was childless, with no clear heir. Aragon and Navarre were divided again. In 1137, Ramiro II, the monk, Alfonso the Battler's brother, who had reluctantly become Aragon's king, married off his one-year-old daughter Petronilla to Barcelona's Count Ramon Berenguer IV. This union gave Aragon sea access and created the Crown of Aragon. This was called the Crown rather than Kingdom of Aragon because the king ruled different political entities: the Kingdom of Aragon, Kingdom of Valencia, and Principality of Catalonia. They were separate states held together by the Crown of Aragon. Ramiro effectively stepped down that year and unofficially allowed his new son-in-law to rule. Meanwhile, in western Iberia, kingdoms were forged less peacefully, specifically an emerging one called Portugal. The County of Portugal had growing autonomy, at least since Alfonso VI had given it to his son-in-law Henry of Burgundy in 1096. Henry died in 1112. His son Afonso was an infant, so his mother managed affairs. In 1128, he ousted her following a war and became count thereafter. Portuguese people increasingly favoured their own independence. Gradually, confidence that such a course could be taken grew. In 1139, Afonso defeated Almoravids at the Battle of Urique. After such success, he declared himself Portugal's king. Leon, however, didn't favour Portuguese independence. The two kingdoms went to war at the Battle of Valdevez in 1141. The Portuguese defeated Leonese forces, and Leon was forced to recognise their independence in the Treaty of Zamora 2 years later. Thus, a kingdom was born. Alfonso VII had other matters to address and dropped the Portugal issue, namely leading crusades against Almoravids. In this effort, he was much more successful with zealous crusader comrades' help from abroad. As Almoravids confronted numerous internal and external troubles, their dominion began faltering. Alfonso VII penetrated deep into Almoravid lands, sacking cities like Seville and Córdoba, and even taking his forces to Iberia's southern coast. This infuriated the Andalusians. They had looked to Almoravids for protection and suffered their abuses in exchange, only for them to fail their primary purpose. Andalusians began rebelling with Christian and Jewish assistance. As Almoravid rule faltered in Morocco itself, their Al-Andalus hold collapsed in the 1140s, and taifas re-emerged. Part of why Almoravids collapsed was an internal coup d'etat. Another North African Berber group, calling themselves the Almohads, even more religiously devout than Almoravids, began challenging Almoravid control. By 1148, Almohads controlled Morocco and set their sights abroad across North Africa, and of course on the taifas. They first landed in Al-Andalus in 1146 and began conquering taifas. It would take nearly 3 decades, but by 1173 all of Al-Andalus was under their rule. Like their predecessors, Almohads wouldn't honour the dhimmi concept. Christians and Jews were persecuted, often forced to emigrate north, which many did, convert, or frequently face deadly consequences. Alfonso VII died in 1157. His death would help prevent a united Christian response to the pressing Almohad threat, as he divided his kingdom between 2 heirs, separating Leon and Castile. These 2 kingdoms' heirs quickly resolved to war to secure each other's throne. The Castilian heir died within a year of his reign, so his 3-year-old son, Alfonso VIII, became king in 1158. Civil war erupted in Castile during his regency alongside Leonese invasion. However, when he took power at about age 15, he began restoring order to his kingdom. In 1176, he married Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter, providing considerable foreign assistance, which he used to restore integrity to his kingdom. With Almohads controlling Al-Andalus, they began pressing into Christian territory, taking on each major kingdom. In 1195, Alfonso VIII, now approaching 30, mounted a force to march against them. He met them that year at the Battle of Alarcos. It was a decisive Almohad victory, often attributed to Christian disunity. Alarcos would destabilize northern kingdoms for years, especially Castile, which their neighbour and rival Alfonso IX of Leon sought to exploit. In 1197, Leon concluded an alliance with Almohads and invaded Castile. This was seen as such betrayal that the Pope sanctioned a crusade against Leon. Despite victory, Almohads would take some time to genuinely follow up on it. They invaded northern kingdoms in 1211 to finally attempt capitalizing on divided Christian kingdoms' weakness. As they began taking ground, Christians realized their situation's gravity. In 1212, Pope Innocent III called for a crusade against Almohads. Iberian Christian kingdoms joined forces, joined by numerous crusaders, particularly the Templars. 2 determined holy armies, each fighting for what they considered righteousness, met at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa on July 16th of that year. The battle was a decisive victory for the united Christian kingdoms. There were no immediate changes afterward, as Christians couldn't press their advantage, but in hindsight, this battle is recognized as the Reconquista's turning point. Alfonso VIII of Castile died 2 years after Las Navas de Tolosa, succeeded by his 10-year-old son, Enrique Henry. However, Henry died in an accident at age 13 and was succeeded by his older sister Berengaria, who gave power to her teenage son, Ferdinand III. He was her son with King Alfonso IX of Leon, her first cousin once removed and former husband, until their marriage was annulled in 1204. In 1213, the Almohad Caliph died. Almohad rule was already becoming unstable, and they would see rebellions not only in Al-Andalus but across their dominion, hastening their downfall. During the 1220s, Iberian kingdoms began pressing further into their lands, and taifas began re-emerging after overthrowing Almohad administration. By 1228, Almohads no longer ruled Iberia, and their time in their home region was limited as well. The taifas emerging following Almohad departure wouldn't be restored to former glory. Christian kings were pressing south hard and fast, taking advantage of chaos. In 1230, Alfonso IX of Leon died. Now, despite his wishes, his son Ferdinand III became king, thus reuniting Castile and Leon thanks largely to his mother's efforts, creating the Crown of Castile. Ferdinand III would play a major role establishing this prestige, attacking Moorish lands with his allies nearly every year of his reign. Aragon captured Valencia and the Balearic Isles. Portugal reached Iberia's southern coast. Castile, however, took the greatest land share, including many great Al-Andalus cities, namely Córdoba and Seville. With Seville's capture in 1248, Moorish presence in Iberia was restricted to the Emirate of Granada, which itself became Castile's tributary and would remain so with only minor interruptions. This Emirate of Granada, the last Islamic rule refuge, endured tucked behind the Sierra Nevada mountain range, posing little threat unless reinforced by other powers, namely Morocco, which, as we'll see, did happen. Ferdinand III showed variation in his Muslim population approach. In some cases, they were expelled, enslaved, or even executed. Many mosques were destroyed or returned to church use, common in the south, where Christian rule was newer and more unstable. However, in many other cases, especially in the north, Muslims and Jews were allowed peaceful coexistence in similar setup to earlier Islamic rule. Ferdinand III died 4 years later, succeeded by his son Alfonso X, who came to be called El Sabio, the Wise. Naturally, with Moorish threats subdued, Christian kingdoms then began scuffling with each other somewhat, though fighting wouldn't be strenuous, with many peace periods. Iberia's borders would remain relatively, though certainly not totally stagnant, until the 15th century. In 1276, the French King Charles IV inherited Navarre. Alfonso X continued focusing on Muslims. The struggle wasn't over yet. In 1264, war with Granada came. Meanwhile, Almohads finally fell in 1269, replaced by a dynasty known as the Marinids, who, upon the emir's request, would send warriors to reinforce Granada. As war waged, rebellions broke out in both Castile and the Emirate, each power supporting rebellion in their opponent's land. In 1275, Castilian and combined Marinid-Granadan forces met at the Battle of Écija, where Alfonso's heir was killed as Castilians were defeated. Alfonso X died in 1284. His scholarly pursuits and higher culture endorsement earned his El Sabio moniker. He was instrumental in promoting Castilian Spanish language use and made great contributions to Castilian law. However, his reign was also unsuccessful in many ways. He damaged trade, debased currency, spent much reign focused on attempting Holy Roman Emperor election, which never truly succeeded. The last great event of his reign was civil war against his second son, fought due to his preference for succession by his first son's grandson instead. He lost, and his second son, Sancho IV el Bravo, the Brave, succeeded him when he died. Sancho IV spent much reign brutally handling rebellious nobles who still favoured his nephew and contending with invading Moors, from whom he sought to take and control the Strait of Gibraltar. He died at age 36 in 1295 from tuberculosis, succeeded by his 10-year-old son Ferdinand IV. The new king's youth sparked a succession dispute throughout the kingdom as competing nobles repeatedly attempted seizing the throne. Ferdinand's mother, Maria de Molina, repeatedly prevented this but couldn't bring kingdom stability. Even Leon broke away again from 1296 to 1301. Ferdinand's rule amounted to less than hoped. In 1309, he captured Gibraltar and other settlements throughout his reign, but died in 1312 at age 26, leaving the throne to a 1-year-old son, Alfonso XI, sparking another succession crisis. Alfonso XI's uncles Juan and Pedro were made regents until 1319, when they both died, along with most of their army, at the Battle of Sierra Elvira, also known as the Disaster of the Vega of Granada, against the Emirate. This disastrous battle left Castile vulnerable, with the border now open to Granadan raids. His mother, Maria de Molina, became sole regent, but died 2 years later. Many powerful Castilian lords now sought to exploit court disorder. Rebellion and exploitation were common. In 1325, however, Alfonso XI announced his intention to rule alone and began ruthlessly subjugating those who had been so burdensome. After spilling sufficient treacherous blood, he turned attention back to the Reconquista. During all this strife, Marinids had conquered Iberia's southern tip, namely settlements of Algeciras and Gibraltar. As Islamic threat grew, the Pope declared a crusade, allowing Alfonso XI to receive aid from across Europe, including Portugal. Christian forces met Muslims at the Battle of Rio Salado in 1340 and scored a decisive victory despite being outnumbered 3-1. This victory restored Castilian strength and pride and earned the king the title the Avenger. Moroccans would never return to Iberia. In 1349, he went to finish the job and besieged the Emirate's heart, Granada city itself. Now nothing could stop the king and his army from completing the Reconquista, or so it seemed. It was that year a new invader entered the conflict, a microscopic one, the Black Plague. The plague would be especially devastating to Iberian kingdoms, eradicating perhaps half the entire population. Alfonso XI, like much of his army, became a victim in March 1350. The siege had to be lifted, and his army withdrew. His 15-year-old son Peter then became king. Peter would also be mired in conflict with nobles and rival claimants throughout his reign, namely his many illegitimate half-siblings. His dealings with them would earn him the moniker the Cruel, though to some he was Peter the Lawful. The year after his father's death, full-blown civil war erupted in Castile against Henry of Trastamara, Alfonso XI's illegitimate son. In 1356, war came with Aragon as well, the War of the Two Pedros or Peters, as Aragon's king was Peter IV. This conflict emerged from the larger 100 Years' War between England and France being waged to the northeast. Castile aligned with England, Aragon with France. These wars waged for many years until 1369. That year, Peter and his Granadan vassals met Henry of Trastamara and his French allies at the Battle of Montiel. Henry took the field and soon thereafter captured and killed Peter himself. That year, Henry was crowned Henry II, but it wasn't over yet, as Portugal contested Henry's right to succeed his half-brother, leading to the Fernandine Wars. War with Aragon would soon end, however. Henry II died in 1379, succeeded by his son John I. He married Beatrice, the daughter of Portugal's king. When King Ferdinand of Portugal died in 1383 with no male heir, John of Castile sought to have his wife placed on the throne, sparking war with Portugal. The inheritance was decided at the Battle of Aljubarrota in 1385, where Portuguese received English reinforcements and won the day, as well as the Battle of Valverde 2 months later, allowing a different John to become Portugal's king. It wouldn't be the last time Portugal had to assert independence against its eastern neighbour, nor the last they would receive English assistance to do so. John of Castile would be more successful handling rebellions north of Portugal in Galicia. He would continue claiming Portugal's throne for the rest of his life until he fell from his horse in 1390 and died at 32. The throne went to his 11-year-old son, Henry III. Henry III proved an efficient king. He bolstered the Castilian navy, which defeated English and Saracen pirates on numerous occasions. He reduced violence against Jews, which had become more prevalent during the Black Plague. Henry III also waged war against Granada, attempting to conclude the Reconquista. However, he died young at 27 in 1406, succeeded by his 1-year-old son, John II. Henry III left behind a changing land. Indeed, the 15th century was a great change period across Europe, a new age's dawn. The 100 Years' War would end in 1453, leaving 2 nation-states with professional standing armies. That same year, the Roman Empire finally ended when the Ottoman Empire took Constantinople. John II would reign almost 50 years. He wasn't exactly an inspiring king, but the land he ruled wouldn't be exempt from this age's glories either. His father had begun Canary Islands' conquest and colonization, islands off Africa's coast, giving Castile its first overseas expansion taste. And his daughter, second heir after her brother's death, well, I feel I need not say much more than her name, Isabella, and her husband, Ferdinand II, King of Aragon. From the rugged mountains of Asturias to the golden halls of Córdoba, the Spanish people have carved one of history's most defiant sagas. They have survived invasions that would have erased any other kingdom, centuries of Islamic rule that reshaped their land, and internal fractures that should have torn them apart. Yet Spain endures. The crossed arrows of the Catholic monarchs still echo. Today, Spain stands as a modern European power, a land of vibrant cultures, ancient universities, and fiestas that never seem to end. The scars remain, the abandoned mosques turned cathedrals, the fortress walls of Granada, the silent courtyards where Jews once studied Torah before expulsion. But so does the fire that reignited the Reconquista, that launched galleons across an uncharted ocean that refused to bow. The story of Spain is not merely a peninsular chronicle, it is a testament for all peoples who have faced occupation, that no invader stays forever, no faith can be entirely extinguished, and no people stay conquered if they remember who they are. The Spaniards proved it. May the world remember. This has been the history of Spain. If you liked this video, make sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe. Since you stayed this long, perhaps you would like to check my other videos. Recent video is about the history of Poland. Until next time,